Version 2 probably talked just a little bit more, right? And the differences between these two versions was what I refer to as the spice of your playing. To me, the spice of your playing would be things like dynamics. You know, how hard you're playing the notes. Staccato versus legato. You know, are you playing everything, or are you playing everything, or halfway between? Whatever you want to do. How about slurs? You know, how are you approaching notes? Are you plucking each note, or are you going, you know, sliding into notes? How about vibrato? Do you hold the note like so, or do you you can get pretty overt with it. Or how about ghost notes? You know, are you implying a 16th note feel by your ghosting? You know, or for that matter, what are ghost notes? They're those little thuds. They're like non-notes, but they have a rhythmic element, introduce a rhythmic element to your playing. Each of these things take your bass a little bit closer to being an actual voice, you know, and in much the same way that your speaking voice has certain nuances and fluctuations, you know, it's those spice things in your, spice things, good band name. It's those spice things in your playing that really kind of take your instrument to the next level in terms of communicating, okay? Let's take a look at each of those individual things real quick in a little bit more detail. Dynamically, it's really easy to play full tilt all the time. You know, just from the downbeat, you just lay into it, and the whole song is kind of at this bombastic level. What happens, though, is that it doesn't give the song a chance to have any ebb and flow and any build, and not to mention the fact that you'll get to that one part that you really want to emphasize, and there's nowhere else to go, right? You've already been cranking it out the whole time. So dynamics are a easily incorporated and really effective thing to throw in as the spice you're playing. Let's look at that lick that we initially did, you know. Well, with dynamics, it really went from it makes it much more communicative, maybe, to do this. It says a little bit more, right? How about staccato versus legato playing? You know, are you always going or a combination of the two, you know? Check out a groove real quick and see how you can use staccato versus legato notes to make it talk a little bit more. You can hear how that kind of mixes it up and introduces a new rhythmic element to it. Looking back at that initial lick, by the way, you can hear how note duration, staccato versus legato, really kind of gave it a different feel too. Instead of going, it was kind of makes it talk a little bit more. It's like speech. I'm not always talking like this, and I'm not always talking, right? It's a combination of the two. Mess with note duration. I think you'll find it's a really effective thing. How about slurs versus hammer-ons? You know, in contrast to nailing every note that you're playing, sliding into certain notes. So in that example, I went, instead of going, I played and all those things make it talk more. How about vibrato? Vibrato is a big thing, you know, and there's a number of different techniques for vibrato. I want to just share 3 of them with you real quick. You know, the importance of vibrato is probably obvious. You know, if you hear a really good singer, the way that you can a lot of times tell that they're a really good singer is they have great vibrato, you know, versus if I was to go la, you know, I mean, if I'm just holding that note, it's not talking too much, right? I won't be emoting that much with no vibrato. So similarly with your bass, if you're going to be holding a note, you can do one of these following types of vibrato and really maybe make it talk more. There's the side to side, and that kind of tends to be more of an acoustic guitarist type of feel. As a matter of fact, I hardly ever do this, except when I'm playing fretless bass, but we'll talk about that later. A more effective one that I use, and easier actually for me, is the up and down. And you basically just kind of get your thumb on the back of the neck and hold the string and go up and down. And you can make it as radical or as subtle as you want. The third type of vibrato is what I call the Abe, after Abe Laboriel. You're probably familiar with his playing, but Abe's a great player, and he's not the one that came up with this type of vibrato, but he uses it a lot, and I think it kind of defines his funk style. And it's this kind of a thing. It's really pretty radical, and it's a side-to-side vibrato, but you're actually jumping over frets, It's a wide vibrato. And it's something that, in that lick, I went the up and down vibrato, then I went. It's kind of funky. It's something you want to apply subtly, obviously. You don't want to, you want to be sensitive to the context. If it would be outlandish it wouldn't work in the middle of I Love You, Lord, to throw in that kind of vibrato. You want to be sensitive, obviously. Okay? Let's get to ghosting, okay? Ghosting, again, is the subtle rhythmic things that you do where you're actually, with your left hand, you're holding the strings like so, and you're picking the notes with your right hand, okay? You can really introduce a neat rhythmic element to your bass lines that wouldn't otherwise be there by using ghost notes. Check this example out. No ghost notes. Okay, here's version 2 with ghost notes. Hear how it introduces a whole lot more rhythm to the groove. And it's really an effective thing, by the way. If you have a particularly busy bass line, you can substitute some of those actual notes for ghost notes, and it kind of reduces the sensation that there's this dense cluster of notes coming at you, and you can kind of pick and choose which notes you're wanting to voice. And this kind of gets back to what we were talking about in Volume 1, where we're dealing with using an economy of notes and just playing sparsely, leaving space in the groove. You can use ghost notes really effectively in that area. Okay? I hope these things help you out. Try to incorporate them with your different bass lines and just try to be sensitive to the musical context and help your instrument communicate. You may recall from Volume 1 how we talked about incorporating other styles of music as a means to introduce some freshness to your grooves and just kind of coming up with a different approach. Well, in order to have those things in your vocabulary, it's important to know what some of the idioms are of those styles, what some of the things are technically that make a style of music that way, from the bass player's perspective. They may be rhythmic things, they may be harmonic things, or they may be even things like tone. Certain tones might be more typical of a certain style of music than another. So I want to encourage you, by the way, to let this be a springboard for your own experimentation. If there are other styles of music that we don't cover today that are your favorites maybe, then check out what some of the things are that make those styles of music that way and allow those styles to become part of your palette to draw from, okay? We'll be keeping the chord progression the same through these so that you can not have to deal with that being another variable. We'll pretty much be looking at 2 bars of G major, 2 bars of C major, 1 bar of A minor, a bar of D7 or D sus, then back to G major, and on occasional examples, it'll go back up to the 5 chord, the D7 or D7 sus. Okay, so you can hear how the country feel generally calls for a simple, straightforward, very solid and foundational type of bass playing. And you may hear how I incorporated a couple of traditional bass lines that are, country bass signatures really. The walk up from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, or from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. At the intro of the tune, you may hear that kind of thing a lot. 1, 2, 3. That kind of a thing. Otherwise, country bass is generally not characterized by a lot of tense passing tones. They're usually pretty much scale tones. It's harmonically inside with a lot of 1s and 5s. Tonally, you want to roll off your treble knob and get it so it's a warmer sound. That's more the, sort of the traditional country bass tone. But otherwise, I encourage you to really kind of explore the country bass style. It's deceptively simple. And, you may listen to it at first and think, oh, this would be a breeze to play. But to play it with just the right feel and phrasing and groove and be unwavering in that groove actually requires a very high level of musicianship. So go for it and have fun. Okay, so that was kind of a jazzier take on that same chord progression. You may have noticed that I opted to go for more of a loose jazz ballad type of feel than the traditional jazz, walking eighth note type of bass line. That maybe takes it a little bit too far into the Charlie Parker Does Worship type vibe, and that would actually be cool. It kind of depends on your individual situation and whether or not that would be appropriate. But if you wanted to do something maybe a little bit more subtle, then you might want to kind of take the approach that I did. Now, I want to, at this time, kind of play through some of those examples real quick on my fretless bass. This is a Carvin AC50F fretless acoustic, and it's kind of got that sound that's halfway between an upright and a fretless bass, a solid body fretless, and it's kind of a neat timbre to be able to throw in here. This is a great bass. I really like it. But what were some of the things that made that a jazz bass line? Well, one of the things that's a signature jazz type of lick or harmonic element is the fact that I'm approaching each chord tone from a half step above, sort of chromatically. So I was doing the 1 chord, G. That chord, that note just begs to be resolved to this, right? Similarly, from the 5 chord. Another thing that I was doing that was sort of a jazz bass signature would be implying the 2-5 turnaround. The 2-5 turnaround is one of the main things you hear in jazz music. And what that involves, say I'm on the 5, and then I don't go and just play the 5 chord, I go, see that? 2, 5, 1. That's used a lot in jazz. And actually, if you can get the other players to agree, the 1-6-2-5 is actually very typical of a jazz turnaround as well, where you go. Where it's 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. You can even approach those, each of those chords from a half step above. You may want to talk it over with the other band members, by the way. You know, if you're implying that 1-6-2-5 progression, it doesn't work quite as well if the other instruments aren't kind of alluding to that same chord motion as well. But rhythmically, you may have heard that I was approaching that whole example with much more of a lazy kind of backside of the beat feel. And that's very consistent with that type of overall feel, that genre. If you're playing on top of the beat and kind of pushing it a little bit, it tends to introduce a little bit of an urgency that is contrary to the overall feel you're going for. So you may want to kind of think about that as you're playing. In terms of tone, you're almost always in that style trying to emulate the sound of an upright bass. So anything you can do, roll off the treble, bust out your fretless, anything you can do to make it sound like that introduces more of that jazz type of feel. If you're interested in exploring the style of music more, I definitely encourage you to listen to the masters, Ron Carter, Paul Chambers, the list goes on, and listen to how they approach the jazz standards. You can learn volumes by just analyzing what they do. All right? Okay, so that was kind of a fingerstyle funk approach to that progression. The bass line, at least, was very funk influenced. I'm not too sure about the program keyboard part. But anyway, for those of you who saw Volume 1, you will probably recognize a couple of things. There was definitely a thematic approach, and I was using meat and potatoes intervals as well. You heard 1, 5, 6 below, right? Exclusive use of 1, 5, and 6. And the thematic idea was basically that when I went to the second chord, the C chord, I just transposed my first little pattern. Right? That is actually in itself a very big funk idiom. The classic funk style, a la Tower of Power and Rocco Prestia's bass lines, are characterized by a tight, staccato, repetitive bass line that has certain variations thrown in as it goes on. The 16th note type of pulse that's created by using those ghost notes, by the way. Hear that? Ghost notes all over the place. And that's tending to make it a less busier line. It's just rhythmically charged, but there aren't too many actual voice notes in there. That's definitely a funk idiom as well. Something that we talked about with the jazz style that really applies here too is also the use of certain passing tones. You can hear when I was going to the C, I approached that chromatically from a half step above as well. Right? Jazz and funk actually share a lot of those things. Blues as well. All of those styles really kind of use a lot of the passing tones. Funk also uses a lot of other passing tones. You may have heard this type of a line in a funk bass line before. Flat third to the third, kind of a hammer thing. 6 to the flat 7. Sharp 5 to the 6. Or the sharp 4 to the 5, or from the sharp 4 down to the 4. You hear those a lot, especially when you're talking. You hear those kind of sliding into your chord tones, and that's very much a funk idiom. The essence of the style is basically attitude. If you're playing something and you're kind of thinking, oh, this may sound a little bit corny, it's probably not too authentic in the funk sense. Tonally, you generally can get away with a little bit more of a lower mid-range heavy type of tone to really get the bass to sit pretty presently in the mix and propel the band. That's typically the bass's role in this style of music. Okay, so that was kind of a rock approach on that same chord progression. You can hear how it's just generally a fairly driving feel with a little bit of edge based around an eighth note rhythmic feel generally. And the rock approach tends to be characterized by a little bit more of a riff-oriented thing. You hear in the second time through I started throwing in more riffs, but you want to keep the groove going. And the way you can accomplish that, getting right down to it, a lot of times, is by keeping your licks pretty much towards the end of the bar. So if you have 1, 2, 3, that whole portion of the bar that you're using to reinforce the groove, and then maybe on the end of 3 and through beat 4, you're throwing in your embellishment leading to the next chord, you can generally keep that feel going. So it's like, hear that? So experiment around with that and see if you can throw in those types of rock patterns without making it jeopardize the overall feel. Tonally, rock is such a big thing to really try to nail down a specific rock tone, but generally you could probably get away with putting in a little bit more mid-range and making it a little bit more of an aggressive tone. Depending on your specific worship situation, though, you may want to leave the overdrive distortion pedal at home. Okay, so when you're going for more of that reggae-influenced feel, a couple of things you want to keep in mind. Rhythmically, it should be very much on the backside and very lazy, like that jazz ballad feel, in terms of your overall approach. If you're too on top of it, it just doesn't have that feel. You can see that I actually pulled out a little bit of a different technique for that. And it's one where you basically get your palm and put it up against the strings like this to kind of mute them. And it's like a thud. You're playing with your thumb. All right? It's kind of that's a fun timbre to be able to pull out once in a while. Again, something else to go in that palette of colors you can apply to the canvas. Otherwise, the reggae feel is generally one that doesn't emphasize or isn't playing on the downbeat of 1, okay? It sort of answers that. You may have noticed it was like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. That's very, very typical of the reggae feel as well. Tonally, again, you're looking for that general kind of a thud type of feel and a little bit more of a nebulous sound instead of one where it's less overt. It's a little bit more subtle than that. All right, have fun with that. I love Latin